I think you know by now that I avoid a pulpit. It's a personal thing for me. There's something about it that says this is a word from the Lord, and I'm the Lord's servant. But sometimes I get it, and sometimes I don't. And I don't think I don't ever want you to think I'm high and lifted up. And when I talk about serious issues and serious things, I'm inclined to do what Jesus did when he taught, and that is he sat down. So that's what I want to do today. We Presbyterians are strange people. You realize that when we ask the questions of church membership, we don't ask people to be Presbyterians. We ask them if Jesus is their Lord and Savior, and do they trust in him? And do they promise to be his faithful witness, obeying his word and showing his love? And we ask them, will you be a faithful member of this congregation and seek the fellowship of the community wherever you may be? That's it. So we don't expect you to know how Presbyterians work. We elect elders and deacons to do that, and they take additional vows. And they become the Presbyterians that keep the place Presbyterian. That means that a lot of times you don't know much of anything about how a church runs financially, and especially how Presbyterians run financially. The Stewardship and Finance Committee and the session was talking about this earlier this fall and said, you know, we need one time in one place where we can talk to as many people as we can all at once. And I said, well, Jesus talked about treasure. And so why don't we talk about it in worship? That's what we're going to do today. So, would you put the first slide up? You remember this slide? This was a slide that we talked about how we all live in a bunch of different communities, and all of those communities have a group of people that gather, that have commonality, and that have a set of values. And if the church is one of those communities among many on the side, then we have a hard time translating our values as Christians into the other communities. More than that, we know that these communities have power to try to get a hold of us. And so they want to impose their values upon us as followers, and sometimes those things are highly contradictory to the way that we as followers think the world ought to be run. You know, I don't have time to talk about politics and politicians and the country, but that's a really great example. All right? So we put ourselves at the center, and we want to be intentional followers so that we grow and we are better followers. And when we work at that and develop habits and patterns about that, then we become, our identity becomes that center circle. And through that whole process, when we walk in these other circles, we wind up influencing those circles with the values that we have as followers. Does that make sense? Are we all on the same page? Because that's really important. We'll come back to that. So I'm going to talk about church economics. Church Economics 101. The church is not a business. I don't know how many elders have said in my 36-year career, well, we need to run like a business. No, we don't. We need to do business better than that. We are not a business. We don't raise prices when we need to make more money. We don't have sales. We're not in business to make money. Most businesses are in businesses to make money. And we don't do that. We're not a club. We're all close and we love each other here and we're really nice. But we don't have dues. We don't send you a bill and say what you have to do to be a member of this club. We don't even do assessments when we need to do major work on something, like a big repair bill or something like that, and we just divide the bill up and send it out. We're not a club. We're not in it for each other. Sometimes churches forget that, and they become a little incestuous. And I have been an interim of a church that pretty much was a club, and they were a dying church. And we're not a nonprofit. We are a civil corporation as well as an ecclesial one. And we are required to obey civil law for nonprofits. But we're not a nonprofit. We don't have the 3 G's. We don't have golf tournaments and we don't have galas. We can't apply for a whole bunch of grants because most grants don't look for religious organizations at all. And we don't have gimmicks. That's a 4th G. And when churches are healthy, they don't act like a nonprofit and do fundraisers and have donations and stuff. Churches have an offering every week in worship and anytime we worship. You want to change it? And sometimes that offering is an opportunity to collect money. But the offering at the end of worship is a whole lot bigger than collecting some money to run the church, isn't it? It's a time of dedication of who we are and what we do as followers. And we make an offering of ourselves. Now, the truth is, that offering includes our money, doesn't it? When I was at First Austin, Cliff Bowling was one of the elders in the church. He was on session. I told him to come up at the time of the children's sermon, and I told him to take his billfold out of his wallet. And I said, okay, take all the credit cards out of your wallet and take all the cash out of your wallet. Hand me God's money. You realize that? Stewardship doesn't begin with how much you're going to give to the church. Stewardship begins with the fact that all we have and are is God's. And it's given to us to manage, and it's given for us to have a deep and rich and meaningful life. The Presbyterian Church has a book of order. It's one of the volumes of the Constitution. The other one is the Historic Confessions of the Church. We have rules for how we operate in the Presbyterian Church. And I think one of the things to get clear to you is that every Presbyterian Church USA in the country runs under the same rules. We have the same Constitution. It's really one church in many places. It may surprise you to know that this church does not own this property. We hold this property in trust. It's owned by the Presbyterian Church USA. We are one church that meets in many places. And so we have these rules about the carefulness of finances. The Book of Order says that you have to do a professional or financial review of your books every single year to make sure you're doing things right. Okay? I want to tell you, I've been in 11 Presbyterian churches now, and this church runs right better than any church I've ever been in. For one thing, you do a financial review every year. And for another, you listen to what's recommended and you change what you're doing to make it better. And everybody needs to be thankful to Sandy Nicholson, who's been the treasurer of the church, and Jeanette, who was the treasurer before her. Right? You're careful with money. The session is careful with money. The session is careful with mission, more important than money. The session runs this church. The congregation does not vote on a budget. The session manages the financial life of the church. That frees you to not have to worry about it. You know, you're not like I was when Trinity Baptist Church had 1,000 members already at the end of 4 or 5 years, and I was a little kid, and they had a quarterly business meeting. A bunch of people in the church gathered in the sanctuary for a business meeting, and they had an argument about whether they ought to buy 5 typewriters or 8 typewriters. And as a 5-year-old, I thought, that's crazy. Let somebody else decide that. So there's something else about this and about money. If all of those things are true, then about 150 giving units that are a part of this congregation raise the money, give the offerings to pay for the work of this congregation. Change the slide. So, this is the last 4 years in expenditures at the church. And I want you to see that pastor and staff constitute the 2 biggest categories in this church and in every church. Okay? And the reason is they are the most important asset that the church has got. And if you want a really good church, you can't have a mediocre staff, because they know more about how to get things done in a church than you do, and they help you get things done. And if you don't, you're on your own. How many of you have been in a church where you were on a committee and you were on your own without help? See? So that's important. We worry about facilities here. We've got buildings that are old. We take really good care of the assets that belong to the Presbyterian Church. Last year, we had a little problem in the day school. All of the plumbing underneath the day school was bad and had to be fixed. And Sandy, that was about $40,000 all told? Huh?
That was the first.
Yeah, that was the first thing. Okay? Some of that money came out of the general operating fund because we had budgeted for some things. But it was a bigger bill than we thought, and we had some reserved monies that we went and hunted for that we saved for the rainy day, and we got that done. So that was that was why that thing jumped up right there. Now, we had some problems this year too, didn't we? And you know that wonderful thing that we've got to shade your car when you show up if you get here first. That's a solar panel, and it has been a miracle to the electric bill at this church. But it went bad, and it took a long time to get it fixed, and et cetera, et cetera. The session manages that. Okay. Now, we give a tithe of our total budget to mission. Right there. And that is the organizations, we distribute money to the organizations that are our partners in mission to the priorities that we have for things like homelessness, hunger, for racial issues, for interfaith issues, and LGBTQ plus issues. And we partner with some of those organizations. We have gotten more strategic about that because we used to have more agencies that we helped with, and the MOJ committee has been selecting so that instead of giving everybody $100, we give a few of these organizations that are effective more money, so it makes a difference what we give. Does that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Oh, so, and we have program, worship, Christian education, Christian formation, adults and children, fellowship and ministry. One of the things that I have tried to stress, and I have tried to get this congregation to do, is to stop always raising money to help with different things that we do, like, say, sending youth to camp. We think we're responsible. We're teaching responsibility to our young people for them to raise the money, for them to go to camp, and we give scholarships, and we do this, that, and the other. That should be a gift that we give to our youth, because they're in the Christian formation business, and they're trying to learn to be Christians. So we want to put that money in the general fund. And you can put that money in your pledge. You know? I was in a different kind of church growing up. It became a great big church pretty quickly. The only money my dad ever had to shell out for me to go to camp or a choir trip or anything else was $4 a day for food. The rest of it I got on the bus and went to Florida. So I felt an unbelievable sense of gratitude because my dad couldn't afford what you have to pay for to do much of anything. You hear me? So up your pledge instead of doing this stuff with kids and fundraising and all that stuff. All right. Now I want to talk next about a pastor. Okay, next slide. Hear me carefully. In 2022, you had a pretty big number for your pastoral staff because it was 2 people. You had a head of staff, pastor, and you had an associate, Don Martin. Okay? Now, part of Don's job was the Soul Center, and part of it was the church. So some money was put from the Soul Center into the church budget as a subsidy, but half of it went, the church paid for. About half, right? About half and half. So, and Dawn, because she's ordained, she had board of pensions, and she had insurance, professional expenses, et cetera, et cetera. So you had two people here, and the next year you had 2 people here. And you gave a cost of living raise to those people, and that also kind of balloons into the other kinds of categories that follow from it. So Don got a job with the Presbyterian Church USA, okay, and your pastor left. And I came, okay? By rule, by Presbyterian rule, an interim pastor gets the same salary as the pastor who left gets. And there's a reason for that. If you try to get cheap, and some churches do get cheap, and you want just a little part-time person and you want to pay them a little, then when it comes time for a new pastor, you're in real trouble. Because you had a huge dip in your budget and you didn't keep that up there. So that's trying to help churches. I came and I was making what the previous pastor had been making. The second year, which is this year, 24, I got a raise. I got a raise. But your PNC doesn't look at my salary and say, oh, we need to give a little more than David's making for a new pastor. A PNC has to look at the skill set and the size of church and find out what those kinds of churches are paying their pastor. And guess what? We found out that this church, for years, has been paying less than average for a church of your size for its pastor when you compare the historical statistics of Mission Presbytery, New Covenant Houston, and Grace Presbytery. You have underpaid your pastor. And some of you know, because I've had conversations with you, and you've said, yeah, I know we've done that. There's a reason that you've done that. And I'm just shooting straight with you. I generally shoot straight. And I heard this about the first 3 or 4 months I was here as I walked around and asked questions and stuff. And the phrase that came several times, more than one or two, was, yeah, we know we have financial issues because we're timid about talking about money. We're not good at talking about money. Part of that is because you have great harmony in the congregation, and you don't talk about things that would bring disharmony, so you kind of stay quiet about that. We have to talk about money now, all right? Because what they found out, and this is a placeholder number, when they send in their form with all of the stuff that ministers can look at, they have to give a minimum and maximum salary that the church is willing to pay, okay? And this is the placeholder number for that. And it means that you probably are at about $25,000 more in salary than you're paying me, or $20,000 in salary, $25,000 in the whole package. And that's a bunch of money, isn't it? And who's going to pay that? Who's going to do that? Do I want a show of hands? Yeah. Every hand should go up. That's who's here to do that. It's not something somebody else can do. I'm right? Everybody has to be in. Everybody has to be in. And that's a really important thing. So let me show you something else. Next slide. 70% of your income comes from pledges. So 70% of your contribution income comes from pledges. You have people in the church that don't pledge and give some money, and that's fine, that's wonderful. But that's that's a smaller number, and it's a smaller amount. And plate is just the money that comes in cash kind of thing, because you have to account for that. So UPCC, your children's center, pays rent, basically. They provide a subsidy to the church out of the fees and stuff that they pay. And that's this money that's there. And then we have some non-contribution income, small income from funds and fees and things like that. But the lion's share of giving in a church is a pledge. Church is different. It doesn't work like nonprofits, etc. So a pledge is not a contract, and it's not an investment that you make with a return. The pledge is the offering. And what it is an exercise in follower discipline. Because if you were listening to the Old Testament lesson, a pledge is a first fruits decision. Now, in the old Jewish times of the Old Testament, a first fruits was 10% off the top of everything that came your way in the way of blessing. That's what it was. And they had a mountain of this stuff. And out of that, they did all kinds of ministry and work and whatever. Because a lot of that went back to people in need in the congregation or this, that, and the other. But that's the way it worked. 10% more than covered the bills. When I was a little kid, tithing was kind of a thing. It was just talked about. We don't talk about it anymore for a long time. In the 80s, we quit talking about it because that's when we went to nonprofit, fundraising and all that kind of stuff. And Presbyterians got timid about talking about money. Now, I'm not going to talk about tithing, but I am going to talk about a percentage. A disciple discipline percentage of how much your income is. Your current income. And to look at that and say, okay, could I give that percentage to the church out of my income, not what I think the church needs? Because it's not about that, it's about you. And if you can give it, that's wonderful. If you can't afford it, pick a smaller percentage. If it's too small, pick a higher percentage. And look at it that way. If you think this place is a place that's a good place for blessing and that your gift makes a huge difference, then give. There's some of you in this room who probably give too much. I've never been in a congregation that didn't have somebody that gave too much. There's some of you that give a gift and you kind of give them the same gift for a good long while because you, quote, are on a fixed income, but you're not on a fixed income. If you get a cost of living raise, you're not on a fixed income. And if you've kept your number the same for 10 years, guess what? You're giving less to the church. Because the cost of living at the church goes up and goes up and goes up. It's just common sense stuff, okay? So think about that. And some of you, in putting yourself at the center of that circle and trying to integrate your life until it has great integrity as a follower, need to think about regular giving to the church as a discipline. If we do that, my guess is we'll cover this problem. But I want you to understand something. Most of the pledge income in this church comes from people who are over 60. 65%, 70% of the income to this church comes from people who are over 60. And what happens to those people? Somebody dies. Another reason we have a problem, and you could name the names of some of these people, you had 4 or 5 significant deaths that have meant a drop in contributions of over $40,000 in 2 years. The Lord loves a cheerful giver, and I, because of some estate stuff that I've had to do, I know that 2 of them were really cheerful givers. God had blessed them. They weren't wealthy. They didn't have a whole bunch of extra money, but they gave generously and substantially. So I've had my say. And I hope you don't hear just my voice. But I hope you realize that if you're giving $100 to some big organization, it's not making any difference there, and it will make a difference here. And if you look at your income after you've done your percentage, and you start seeing on your credit card stuff that you really didn't need to spend money on, and it wasn't really worth it, you kind of wasted the money when you did it, then add that money. It's an exercise in follower discipline. Because I can tell you that the best money my wife and I give is to this church and Divine Redeemer. And they get our first gift, and they sure get our largest gift. Because the work of God needs it, and this place needs it. Amen.